The old general was laughing at him. Not out loud, but Vashtor Kren could see it in his eyes, in the way his mandibles twitched with amusement. Fleet Admiral Vashtor Kren had spent 40 years in the Kalith Dominion's military, and never once had he felt as small as he did now, standing before the Galactic Concordance Council. "You want us to believe," said Counselor Thessa, her voice dripping with contempt, "that a species without faster-than-light travel, without energy shields, without even a unified planetary government poses a threat to this council?" "I am not saying they pose a threat," Vashator said. His voice was steady, though his hands were not. "I am saying we do not understand them, and what we do not understand, we should not attack." A ripple of quiet laughter passed through the chamber. Vashator had known this would happen. He had seen it happen to other officers who spoke too much truth in this room. But he had made a promise to himself, 20 years ago, when he first read the reports from the failed reconnaissance probe sent to the third planet of a yellow star system called Sol. The probe had transmitted for 6 hours before it went silent. In those 6 hours, it had recorded things that no one in the council chamber today had bothered to review. Vashator had reviewed them. He had watched the recordings until his eyes burned. He had seen a species that built weapons not to conquer, but to survive. He had seen cities that rose from ashes again and again. He had seen something in their eyes, in the way they looked at the stars, that he could not name but could not forget either. "General Kren," came a new voice, sharp and confident, cutting through the chamber. "Perhaps you have grown too old for the front lines. Perhaps that is why you are afraid of a planet full of soft, wet creatures who have not even left their own solar system." Vashator turned to see General Threx Cullen step forward. Threx was young, decorated, and hungry. He had won 3 campaigns in the Outer Rim, each one bloodier and faster than the last. He wore his medals like a second skin, and he wore his ambition even more openly. "I am not afraid," Vashator said quietly. "I am cautious. There is a difference, General Cullen, though I understand why a man of your age might not know it yet." The insult landed, and for a moment Threx's confident smile flickered. But he recovered quickly, turning to address the council instead of Vashator. "I volunteer my fleet," Threx announced, loud enough for every corner of the chamber to hear. "Give me 3 battle groups and I will have this planet surrender within 1 rotation. I will show this council and this old general that Earth is nothing to fear." The council members exchanged glances. Vashator could see the decision forming before it was even spoken. They wanted this. They wanted a quick, clean conquest to add to their long list of victories. They wanted to prove that nothing in this galaxy could resist the concordance. "The motion is approved," Counselor Thessa said. "General Cullen, you will lead the invasion of the human homeworld. General Kren." She turned to him with something close to pity in her eyes. "You are relieved of duty, effective immediately. You will remain under house arrest until this matter is concluded for your own safety. Your recent behavior has been concerning to this council." Vashtor did not argue. He had learned long ago that arguing with the council once a decision was made only made things worse. Instead, he watched as Threx Cullen strode from the chamber, already barking orders to his aides, already dreaming of the parades that would follow his victory. As the guards escorted Vashator from the chamber, he passed close to his old aide Senir, who had served with him for 15 years. Senir's eyes were full of questions he did not dare ask aloud. "They do not need ships to be dangerous," Vashator whispered, so quietly that only Senir could hear. "That is what frightens me most. Watch the recordings again, Senir. Watch them closely, and pray that Threx Cullen never has to learn what I already know." Senir said nothing, but he did not forget those words. 3 weeks later, General Threx Cullen's fleet dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Sol system. 42 warships, each one capable of turning a continent to glass, spread out in a formation designed to look as terrifying as possible. Threx stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Dominion's Wrath, watching the blue and green planet grow larger on the view screen. "Scan the planet," he ordered. "Full spectrum. I want to know everything about these humans before we make contact." His science officer, a nervous young Caliph named Voss, worked quickly at his console. Minutes passed. Then Voss's antennae drooped, a sign of confusion among his kind. "General, I am detecting very little military activity. No orbital defense platforms, no fleet formations. Their satellites appear to be civilian in nature. Communications and weather monitoring, mostly." "Good," Threx said, allowing himself a small smile. "Just as I expected. This will be over quickly." "General," Voss continued, his voice growing more uncertain, "I am also detecting something else. Their communication networks. They went quiet the moment we dropped out of hyperspace. Not damaged, not jammed, simply quiet. As if they knew we were coming and they are choosing not to react." Threx frowned, but he waved the concern away. "Primitive creatures panicking. Nothing more. Open a channel to their strongest government. What do they call it? The United Nations?" The channel opened. Threx addressed the humans of Earth in their own language, translated by his ship's systems, his voice booming with confidence. "People of Earth, this is General Threx Collin of the Caliph Dominion, acting under the authority of the Galactic Concordance. Your world has been claimed for annexation. You have 1 hour to submit to peaceful surrender. Any resistance will be met with immediate and total force. This is not a request." He closed the channel and leaned back in his command chair, waiting for the panic, the pleading, the desperate offers of surrender that he had seen from a dozen other conquered worlds. Instead, there was only silence. 10 minutes passed. Then 20. Threx's confidence began to curdle into irritation. "Why have they not responded?" he demanded. "Unknown, General," Voss said. "There is no increase in military communications, no mobilization of forces, no distress signals to allied worlds, though as far as I can tell, they have no allies to signal in the first place. It is as if—" Voss hesitated. "As if what?" "As if they are simply waiting, sir." Threx stood from his chair and walked to the view screen, staring down at the quiet blue planet below. Something about the silence unsettled him, though he refused to admit it aloud. He thought of Vashitor Kren's warning in the council chamber, and for the first time, a small, cold seed of doubt took root in his mind. He pushed the feeling away. These were primitive creatures, frightened animals hiding in their burrows, hoping the predator would lose interest and leave. That was all this was. "Bring the fleet into standard orbital formation," he ordered. "If they will not respond to words, we will remind them why words are unnecessary. Ready the first strike group." "General," Voss said, his voice suddenly tight with alarm, "I am picking up something on long-range sensors. A single contact, moving from the planet's surface. It is small, fast, and I cannot get a clear reading on its weapon systems or its shielding. It does not match any known configuration in our database." Threx's jaw tightened. "One ship? Against my entire fleet?" "Yes, General. And sir, it is not hiding. It is broadcasting a location beacon. It wants us to see it coming." On the view screen, a single point of light detached itself from the darkness near Earth's moon and began moving toward the Dominion fleet, unafraid, unhurried, and utterly alone. The single ship did not fire first. It did not fire at all, at least not in the way Threx expected. It moved through the Dominion fleet's formation like a knife through smoke, weaving between destroyers 300 times its size, and for 11 seconds, every sensor screen on the Dominion's wrath went completely dark. When they came back online, General Threx Collin's flagship had lost 40% of its shield capacity, and the mysterious human vessel was already gone, vanished back toward the planet's surface without a single visible weapon discharge. "Report," Threx roared. "What happened? What hit us?" Voss stared at his console, his hands trembling. "General, our shields did not fail from an external attack. They were turned off from the inside. Someone accessed our systems and shut down our defenses for exactly 11 seconds, then restored them before withdrawing." The bridge fell silent. Every Caliph officer understood what this meant, even if none of them wanted to say it aloud. This was not an attack. This was a demonstration, a message written not in words but in capability. We could have destroyed you, and we chose not to. 200 kilometers below, in a bunker buried beneath the ruins of a city that no longer existed on any public map, Colonel Ava Reyes watched the same 11 seconds of footage on 6 different screens. She was 43 years old, with gray already threading through her dark hair, and eyes that had seen more than any person her age should have to see. She commanded something called the Threshold Division, an organization that officially did not exist, staffed by people whose names had been erased from every public record the moment they joined. "That's your restraint demonstration, Colonel," said Dr. Malik Ose, standing beside her. He was a xenolinguist by training, though he had not translated a textbook in 15 years. Instead, he had spent that time listening to signals from the stars that most of humanity did not know existed, decoding a language that had taken him a decade to understand even partially. "Do you think they got the message?" "They got a message," Ava said. "Whether it's the right one is up to them." On the bridge of the Dominion's wrath, Threx was already deciding it was not the right one. "They think to frighten us with parlor tricks," he snarled, pacing the length of the bridge. "A single ship disabling shields for 11 seconds. It changes nothing. Prepare the fleet for full bombardment. Target their largest population centers. We will show these creatures what real power looks like." "General," Voss said carefully, "should we not attempt further contact first? If they possess technology capable of—" "I did not ask for your opinion, science officer. I asked for a target lock." Threx's voice left no room for argument. "These humans want to play games. Very well. Let us see how they enjoy losing." The order went out. 42 Dominion warships aligned their weapon systems, targeting solutions locking onto cities across 3 continents. Threx watched the readiness indicators turn green one by one, savoring the moment. This was what he had trained his entire life for, the moment when doubt died and power spoke for itself. "Fire!" he commanded. Nothing happened. The weapons officer, a grizzled veteran named Karth, stared at his console in confusion. "General, the targeting systems show green, but the weapons are not discharging. I am attempting manual override." Across the fleet, the same failure repeated itself ship after ship. Energy weapons that had leveled cities on a dozen worlds simply refused to fire. Not jammed, not damaged. As Voss reported with a voice growing increasingly hollow, it was as if the weapons themselves had forgotten how to work, their firing mechanisms responding to commands but producing nothing at the other end. "This is impossible," Threx whispered, staring at the planet below, which continued to sit there, blue and green and utterly unbothered, as if it knew something he did not. That was when Karth's console lit up with a new alert, one that made the old weapons officer's face go pale. "General, the Vantress, she has gone dark. All systems, all communications gone." "Gone, explain." "I cannot, sir. One moment she was in formation, running standard diagnostics after the weapons failure. The next there is simply nothing, no debris, no distress beacon, no wreckage on sensors. It is as if she was never there at all." Threx felt something cold settle into his stomach, a feeling he had not experienced since he was a young cadet on his first deployment, watching his training officer die in a battle he had not been prepared for. "Find her," he ordered. "Send scout ships. She cannot simply vanish." But even as he gave the order, 2 more contacts blinked out on the tactical display. The Ashkar Blade, the Korath Fang, ships that had survived a dozen campaigns across the Outer Rim, gone in an instant without a scream, without a single shot fired that anyone could detect. In the bunker below, Ava Reyes watched the Dominion fleet's confusion unfold on her own screens, her expression carefully neutral, though Malik could see the tension in the set of her shoulders. 3 ships in 9 minutes, Malik said quietly. "That's faster than the projections estimated." "The projections were based on a fleet that would retreat after the first demonstration," Ava said. "Colin isn't retreating. He's escalating. That changes the math." "Are we going to lose containment?" Ava did not answer immediately. She was watching a different screen now, one that showed not the fleet in orbit but a quiet office deep within the bunker, where a small team monitored something the rest of the Threshold Division rarely discussed openly. A system that had been built decades ago, refined over generations, designed for exactly this scenario and prayed to never be needed. "We're not going to lose anything," she finally said. "But Colin is about to learn that this isn't a war he can win by escalating. Every ship he loses makes it harder for him to go home and tell the truth, and the longer this goes on, the more of his fleet becomes unavailable." "Unavailable," Malik repeated. "That's an interesting word for it." Ava did not smile, though something in her eyes suggested she understood exactly why he had said it that way. "It's the accurate word for it, Malik. Nobody down here wants a massacre. That was never the plan. But General Cullen doesn't know that yet, and until he does, he's going to keep making the same mistake." Above them, on the bridge of the Dominion's Wrath, Threx Colin stared at the tactical display, watching 3 more ships blink into the void of unavailability, his confidence cracking with each loss. He turned to Voss, his voice tight with barely controlled fury. "Get me a channel to the Concordance now. I need to report." "General," Voss interrupted, his voice barely above a whisper, "I cannot raise the Concordance relay. Our long-range communications are. They are not offline, sir. They are being actively blocked. Something on this end is preventing every outgoing transmission." Threx stared at the blue planet on the view screen, and for the first time since he had left the council chamber weeks ago, boasting of an easy victory, he felt truly, deeply afraid. "Then get me his second in command," Threx said, his voice tight. "Commander Drull, I need a status report on our remaining." "General," came a new voice, hesitant and shaken, from the communication station. It was Drull himself, patched through from another ship in the formation, his usual composure completely gone. "General, I regret to inform you, we have lost contact with 3 additional support vessels in the last 2 minutes. The Hollow Sun, the Iron Verdict, and the Pale Reach. Same as before. No wreckage, no warning. They are simply not there anymore." Threx gripped the edge of his command console, his knuckles pale, as the number of missing ships climbed past 6, then 7, and the silent blue planet below continued watching them, patient and unhurried, like a predator that had already decided the outcome and was simply waiting for its prey to understand. By the 9th hour, General Threx Colin had lost 11 ships, and he still did not understand how. He stood on the bridge of the Dominion's Wrath, watching the tactical display with the exhausted, hollow stare of a man who had run out of explanations. His officers no longer looked at him with the confidence they had shown when the fleet first arrived. Now their eyes held something closer to fear, and Threx knew that fear was contagious, that it could spread through a fleet faster than any weapon. "Options," he said, his voice rough. "Someone give me options." Commander Drull, who had taken over much of the tactical coordination as Threx's own composure frayed, stepped forward reluctantly. "General, I recommend we consider withdrawal. We do not understand this enemy's capabilities, and we are losing ships faster than we can." "Withdrawal is not an option," Threx snapped. "I told the Council I would have this planet surrender within 1 rotation. If I return home having lost a quarter of my fleet to an enemy I never even saw, my career is finished. Worse than finished." He did not say the rest of the thought aloud, though everyone on the bridge understood it. Vashitor Kren had warned them, and if Threx returned in disgrace, the old general's warning would be remembered, while Threx's name would become a byword for humiliation across the entire Dominion. 200 kilometers below, in the Threshold Division's command bunker, Colonel Ava Reyes was reviewing decades of history that very few people alive still remembered in full. The story the public knew, the sanitized version taught in schools, was that humanity had survived the collapse through cooperation and resilience. That was true, but it was not the whole truth. The whole truth was buried in classified archives that only a handful of people, Ava among them, had ever been allowed to read completely. 60 years ago, the collapse had nearly ended human civilization. Climate disasters, resource wars, and the near-total breakdown of every major government had brought humanity within a hair's breadth of extinction. Billions had died. The nations that remained had been forced to make an impossible choice: keep fighting each other over what little remained, or unify and rebuild. They had chosen to unify. But the unification had not come from idealism. It had come from necessity, forged in the understanding that humanity's greatest enemy had always been itself, and that the only way to survive was to become something harder, smarter, and more disciplined than they had ever been before. It was during the darkest years of the rebuilding that a research team monitoring deep space for asteroid threats had detected something far more troubling. Encrypted signals, clearly artificial, clearly not human, sweeping past the edge of the solar system. The discovery had been kept secret from the public, not out of malice, but out of hard-learned caution. A species that had nearly destroyed itself through panic and division could not be trusted to react calmly to proof that it was not alone in the universe and was not necessarily safe. And so the Threshold Division was born, a quiet organization tasked with a single mission: prepare humanity for a first contact that might never come, and if it did come, make certain it went in humanity's favor. They had 30 years to prepare, 30 years of technological development hidden behind civilian research programs, 30 years of building defenses that no other nation, and certainly no alien fleet, knew existed. 30 years of training people like Ava Reyes, who had joined at 19 years old and had given every year since to a mission she could never discuss with anyone outside the division. "Colonel," Malik Osei said, pulling her from her thoughts, "Colin is preparing something. Our intercepts show him diverting resources toward orbital bombardment protocols. He's not targeting military installations anymore. He's targeting population centers directly." Ava's jaw tightened. This was the moment the entire strategy had been built around, and also the moment she had hoped, against all realistic expectation, that they would never reach. "Confirm the target list," she said. Malik read from his screen, his voice steady despite the gravity of what he was reporting. 3 coastal cities, combined population, approximately 40 million people. Ava closed her eyes for 1 second, just one, allowing herself the smallest moment of the fear and fury that she would never permit her officers to see. Then she opened them again, and the moment was gone, replaced by the calm, controlled focus that had defined her entire career. "Authorize full countermeasure protocol," she said. "All ordnance in flight gets intercepted before it clears low orbit. No exceptions, no near misses. I want every missile Colin fires turned into scrap metal before it has a chance to matter." On the bridge of the Dominion's wrath, Threx gave the order he had been building toward since the humiliation began. "Bombardment fleet, target the coordinates provided, full spread, fire at will." Hundreds of orbital strike munitions launched from a dozen Dominion warships, arcing down toward Earth's atmosphere, each one carrying enough destructive force to level a city block by itself. Threx watched the display with grim determination, waiting for the confirmation of impact that would finally restore his fleet's dominance over this insolent little planet. The confirmation never came. Instead, one by one, the strike munitions began detonating in the upper atmosphere, hundreds of kilometers above their intended targets, their explosions blooming silently against the black of space like a field of dying stars. "What is happening?" Threx demanded, his voice cracking with disbelief. "Report. Why are the munitions detonating early?" Voss, his science officer, stared at his readouts with an expression of pure dread. "General, I cannot explain the mechanism, but something is triggering premature detonation on every single munition. It is happening with perfect timing, perfect precision. Whatever is doing this, it is not reacting. It is anticipating." The bridge fell into stunned silence. Every officer present understood what those words meant. This was not luck. This was not primitive defense technology scrambling to react to an unexpected attack. This was a system that had known exactly what was coming, and exactly how to stop it, before it had even been launched. Threx sank slowly into his command chair, the weight of the last 9 hours finally breaking through his carefully maintained composure. He thought again of Vashator Kren, standing in the council chamber, warning them all that humanity did not need ships to be dangerous. He had dismissed those words as the ramblings of an old man too afraid to fight. Now he wondered, with a growing dread that settled into his bones like ice, what else the old general had known and chosen not to say. "General," Drall said quietly, approaching from the communications station, his face pale. "We have a transmission. It is not addressed to the Concordance or to any relay station. It is addressed directly to you." Threx straightened in his chair. "Put it through." The bridge speakers crackled to life, and a voice filled the silence, calm, measured, and utterly without malice, which somehow made it more unsettling than any threat could have been. "General Threx Collin," the voice said, speaking his own language with unnervingly perfect fluency, "you have lost 14 ships in the last hour, though your sensors have only confirmed 11. You have 3 more that will fail before your next status report. I would like you to know that none of your crew have been harmed. That was and remains a choice, not a limitation." Threx's throat had gone dry. He forced himself to speak. "Who is this? What do you want?" "My name is not important right now," the voice replied. "What is important is that you understand something before this continues. You came here believing this would be a conquest. It will not be. The only question remaining is how much more of your fleet you are willing to lose before you accept that fact. The countdown has already started, General. I suggest you spend the time you have left deciding what kind of report you intend to bring home." The transmission ended as abruptly as it had begun, leaving the bridge of the Dominion's wrath in a silence heavier than any Threx had ever known in his 40 years of service. On the tactical display, a 15th ship blinked, flickered, and vanished into the void without a trace, exactly as the voice had promised it would. Ava Reyes was 7 years old when she watched her city die. She did not remember all of it, not clearly, the way adults remembered things. What she remembered came in pieces, fragments that surfaced at strange moments even decades later. The sound of her mother's voice, sharp with a fear she had never heard before, telling her to run and not look back. The taste of ash in the air, thick enough to feel on her tongue. The way the sky had turned a color she had no name for, somewhere between orange and gray, as 3 separate wildfires converged on the outskirts of the city faster than anyone had predicted they could. She remembered her father was not with them. He had stayed behind with a group of neighbors trying to hold a fire break with garden hoses and shovels. A hopeless, desperate act that she would only understand as an adult was never really about saving the neighborhood. It was about buying time. Time for the people who could still run to get far enough away. He did not survive. Neither did 11 of the 14 neighbors who stayed with him. That was the collapse in the smallest, most personal terms Ava Reyes could ever describe it. Not a single event, but thousands of moments like that one, repeated across a planet that had spent 2 centuries taking more from itself than it could ever replace. By the time the fires reached her, the wars over water and farmland had already been raging for 6 years. The old governments, the old alliances, all of it had already crumbled under the weight of a crisis too large for any single nation to survive alone. What came after was not immediate unity. It took another decade of suffering, of failed treaties and broken ceasefires, before enough of humanity's remaining leaders finally understood the same brutal lesson. Cooperation was no longer a moral choice. It was the only path that did not end in extinction. Ava had grown up inside that lesson, raised in a resettlement camp that later became the foundation of the New Geneva Accord, the treaty that finally bound the surviving nations into something resembling a single, functioning civilization. She had been recruited into the Threshold Division at 19, not for any special talent, but because the psychologists who screened new recruits had noted something in her file that made her perfect for the work. She did not panic. She had already lived through the worst thing she could imagine, and she had survived it. Nothing the division could show her afterward ever frightened her in quite the same way. It was Director Amara Voss, the founder of the Threshold Division, who had explained the philosophy to Ava on her first day, in words she never forgot. "We are not building an army to fight aliens, Colonel Reyes," Amara had said, though Ava was not yet a colonel then, only a frightened 19-year-old trying to understand what she had signed up for. "We are building something the galaxy has never seen before because we cannot afford another collapse. Not from ourselves and not from anyone who might come looking to take what little we have left. We prepare quietly. We prepare completely. And if the day ever comes when we must show what we have built, we make certain the message is unmistakable. Humanity will never be caught unprepared again." Sitting in the command bunker decades later, watching General Threx Collins' fleet slowly disintegrate above her, Ava understood that day had finally arrived. "Colonel," Malik said, breaking her thoughts, "you should see this. It's General Kren, the one who tried to stop the invasion in the council chamber." Ava turned to the screen Malik indicated. Their long-range intercepts, built over years of patient listening to concordance communications, had picked up chatter about a Caliph officer under house arrest for opposing the invasion. Ava had read the reports on Vashator Kren weeks ago, when the fleet first entered the system, and something about the old general's warnings had struck her as different from the usual alien bluster. "He knew," Ava said quietly. Somehow, he actually understood what he was warning them about. "The recording we intercepted from his aide suggests he studied the old probe data extensively," Malik said. "The one that went dark 40 years ago. He seems to be the only person in the concordance who took it seriously." Ava thought of that old probe, the first alien vessel to ever enter Earth's solar system, decades before the Threshold Division had built its defenses to the level they now possessed. It had approached slowly, cautiously, clearly a reconnaissance mission, rather than an invasion force. The division had studied it for 6 hours, learning everything they could about its technology, before making the decision to disable and destroy it, rather than risk it reporting back with accurate information about humanity's true capabilities. It had been a hard decision. Amara Voss had made it personally, understanding that whatever crew or intelligence controlled that probe might interpret its destruction as an act of aggression rather than self-defense. But the alternative, allowing an unknown alien power to gather full intelligence on an unprepared Earth, had been an unacceptable risk. "If General Kren escapes house arrest," Ava said slowly, "and if he makes it back to his council with real intelligence, real proof of what happened here that could change everything. Not just for this invasion, for how they choose to deal with us afterward." "Is that good or bad?" Malik asked. Ava did not answer immediately. She was watching a new report scroll across her secondary screen, updates from the surface teams monitoring Threx's remaining forces, and what she read there made her blood run cold in a way that the missing ships had not. "Malik," she said, her voice tightening. "Colin has ordered a ground assault. He's deploying shock troops." Malik's eyes widened. "That's suicide. Even after everything that's happened, he's desperate," Ava said. "He can't go home having lost his entire fleet without at least attempting a ground engagement. It's not about winning anymore. It's about proving he tried everything before he failed." She turned to her tactical officer. "Get me eyes on the drop zones. I want full containment protocols active before those troops even hit the atmosphere." Above them, on the bridge of the Dominion's Wrath, Threx Collin gave the order that would define the rest of his career, one way or another. "Deploy the shock troops," he commanded, his voice hoarse but resolute. "Full tactical gear, full weapons load. I want boots on the ground within the hour. If we cannot defeat whatever is out here, we will at least prove that Caliph soldiers do not simply vanish without a fight." The remaining transport ships in his fleet, already reduced by more than a third, launched their assault pods toward the planet's surface. 200 elite Caliph soldiers, the best warriors the Dominion had to offer, descended through Earth's atmosphere in a formation designed to overwhelm any conventional defense they might encounter. They landed in what had once been farmland, now converted into a training ground that did not appear on any satellite imagery available to Concordance intelligence. The soldiers fanned out immediately, weapons raised, expecting resistance, expecting an enemy they could finally see and fight directly after 9 hours of fighting something invisible. Instead, they found silence. The commanding officer of the ground force, A battle-hardened veteran named Carrick signaled his troops forward cautiously. The terrain around them seemed ordinary enough. Open fields, distant tree lines, the kind of unremarkable landscape that existed on 1,000 worlds across the galaxy. But something felt wrong. "Report," Carrick said into his comm, addressing his scouts spread across the perimeter. "Status on the tree line." There was a pause, longer than it should have been. "Commander," came the reply, and the voice was strained, uncertain in a way that made every hair on Carrick's body stand on end. "The tree line, it's not where it was 2 minutes, not where ago. And Commander, I do not think this is terrain at all. I think it is instrumented. I think it has been watching us since the moment we landed." Commander Carrick never got the chance to ask what his scout meant by instrumented. The ground beneath his feet shifted, not violently, but with a precision that felt almost gentle, and a section of what he had believed was solid earth folded away to reveal a hidden barrier that rose silently around his entire company. Before he could shout a warning, before any of his 200 elite soldiers could raise a weapon in response, a soft hum filled the air, and every piece of Calith equipment, from rifles to armor systems to the encrypted comm units strapped to their wrists, simply stopped working. Not destroyed, not damaged. Simply switched off, as easily as a human might flip a light switch. Carrick tried his rifle anyway, some instinct refusing to accept what his training told him was true. Nothing happened. He looked around at his soldiers, saw the same confusion and dawning fear on every face, and understood, with a clarity that felt like ice water down his spine, that they had not landed in a battle. They had walked into a trap that had been prepared for them long before their assault pods ever entered the atmosphere. Figures emerged from the tree line, moving with quiet, unhurried confidence. They wore no elaborate armor, no intimidating war paint, nothing designed to provoke fear through appearance alone. They simply walked forward, weapons held low but ready, and Carrick realized with growing dread that they did not need to look intimidating. They had already proven, without firing a shot, that intimidation was unnecessary. "Lay down what remains of your equipment," said a voice, translated smoothly into Calith through a small device one of the humans carried. "You will not be harmed if you comply." Carrick looked at his soldiers, weighed his options, and found there were none worth choosing. One by one, the shock troops of the Calith Dominion, warriors who had never known defeat, laid down their useless weapons and knelt in the dirt of a planet that had disarmed them without spilling a single drop of blood. News of the ground force's capture reached Threx within minutes, delivered by a trembling communications officer who could barely meet his general's eyes. Threx sat in his command chair for a long moment, saying nothing, staring at the tactical display where the last of his ground forces had just gone dark, joining the growing list of losses that no longer felt like losses in the traditional sense. Nothing had been destroyed. Everything had simply been taken from him piece by piece, with a patience that felt almost like mercy, and that mercy was somehow more humiliating than any slaughter could have been. "Open a channel," Threx said finally, his voice hollow. "The one who spoke to me before. I want to speak with them again." It did not take long. The same calm voice returned, and this time, Threx requested something he had never expected to ask for in his entire career: a face-to-face meeting, under a flag of truce, to discuss terms. The meeting took place in a small, unremarkable room deep within the Threshold Division's command bunker, a room chosen deliberately for its lack of grandeur. Threx arrived under heavy escort, disarmed and searched thoroughly, though he suspected the search was as much a formality as a necessity. If these humans had wanted him dead, he understood by now that a hidden weapon would not have stopped them. Colonel Ava Reyes sat across a plain metal table, no ceremony, no display of power beyond the simple fact of her calm, unshaken presence. Threx studied her face, searching for the arrogance he expected from a species that had just humiliated the mighty Calith Dominion, and found none, and what he found instead unsettled him more than any triumphant sneer could have. He found tiredness. The look of someone who had done a difficult job because it needed doing, not because she took any pleasure in it. "General Cullen," Ava said, her translated words steady and measured. I want to be clear about something before we go any further. Nothing that happened today was about proving humanity's superiority. It was about making sure you understood the cost of testing us, so that the next fleet that comes here does not have to learn the same lesson through the same losses. Threx's jaw tightened. You have destroyed my career, my reputation, perhaps my life, once I return home and report a defeat that no one will believe was possible. We haven't destroyed anything, Ava said. You made choices, General. Every ship you lost because you chose escalation over caution again and again, even after we made it clear we had no interest in destroying you. We could have killed your entire fleet in the first 10 minutes. We chose not to. That was not weakness, that was restraint. And I would ask you to remember the difference because your council does not seem to understand it yet. Then what do you want? Threx asked, and for the first time, the exhaustion in his own voice matched the tiredness he had seen in hers. What is the point of all this, if not conquest, if not revenge? Ava was quiet for a moment, studying him carefully before she answered. We want to be left alone. That is the entire message, General. Not out of fear, not out of weakness, we have already survived worse than your fleet, worse than anything your concordance could throw at us. And we survived it by becoming something that does not break easily. We do not want your worlds. We do not want your resources. We simply want the galaxy to understand that this planet is not an easy conquest, and never will be again. Something in her tone made Threx pause, a weight behind the words that suggested a history far deeper and more painful than he had considered. He thought of Vashtor Kren's warning again, the old general's insistence that they did not understand this species, and for the first time, Threx began to wonder exactly what Vashtor had seen in those old probe recordings that had frightened him so badly. Meanwhile, half a galaxy away, Vashtor Kren was making his own desperate gamble. Senner had come to him 3 nights earlier, slipping past the guards assigned to Vashtor's house arrest with information that could not wait. New intelligence suggesting the Council was preparing to send a second, larger fleet to Earth, unwilling to accept the possibility that Threx's invasion had simply failed. They believed instead that some other faction, perhaps a rival power, had interfered, and they intended to respond with overwhelming force before any rival could claim the world for themselves. Vashtor knew with certainty that chilled him to his core that a second fleet would end in the same disaster as the first, or worse, if the humans finally decided restraint was no longer worth the effort. He escaped that night with Senir's help, slipping through a maintenance corridor and stealing a transport shuttle bound for the Council's central spire. But loyalty to the Concordance ran deep among certain factions, and word of his escape spread faster than he had anticipated. He was 3 levels from the Council chamber, moving quickly through a service corridor, when a squad of Dominion loyalists stepped out to block his path, weapons raised, their leader's expression cold with the certainty of a man who believed he was capturing a traitor. General Kren, the leader said, you are under arrest for treason against the Concordance. Surrender now, or we will be forced to. Vashtor did not let him finish. He lunged sideways through a side passage he had memorized decades ago during his early years in the spire, hearing weapons fire erupt behind him, the corridor lighting up with energy blasts that scarred the walls where he had stood only a heartbeat before. He ran, lungs burning, years catching up with him in a way they never had during actual combat, knowing that if he was caught now, everything he had risked, everything Threx's fleet had already lost, would mean nothing. The Council chamber doors loomed ahead, guarded by 2 sentries who raised their weapons the moment they saw him coming, blood on his uniform, pursuers closing in behind him, and no way to prove in the next 10 seconds that the words he carried might be the only thing standing between the Concordance and a mistake from which it could never recover. The sentries did not fire. Vashtor Kren skidded to a stop before them, chest heaving, blood from a grazing wound on his shoulder soaking through his uniform, and raised his empty hands in the universal gesture of surrender that every species in the Concordance seemed to understand instinctively. Behind him, his pursuers rounded the corner, weapons still raised, but the sentries guarding the Council chamber doors held their position, caught between conflicting orders and the sight of a decorated general bleeding on their threshold. I carry information the Council must hear, Vashtor gasped, before they send a second fleet to Sol. Detain me after, if you must. but let me speak first. It was perhaps the desperation in his voice, or the simple fact that no officer of his rank had ever begged in quite this way, that made the senior sentry hesitate. That hesitation was enough. The chamber doors opened, and Vashator stumbled through them, past startled council members already assembling for an emergency session about the very fleet he had come to stop. What followed was not elegant. He did not have prepared remarks, no carefully rehearsed argument. He simply spoke the truth as he understood it, for the first time laying out everything he had pieced together from the old probe recordings, decades of careful study, and fragments of a species he had never fully understood but had learned, above all else, to respect. 40 years ago, he said, his voice steadying as the words found their rhythm, a concordant survey vessel entered the Sol system and observed something extraordinary. Not weapons, not fleets, a species clawing its way back from near total extinction, not through conquest but through sheer unbreakable will. That probe went dark, and we assumed it was destroyed by hostile action. I do not believe that any longer. I believe it was disabled, deliberately, by a civilization that understood exactly what information it could not afford to let escape. A murmur rippled through the chamber. Counselor Thessa, who had mocked him weeks earlier, now watched him with an expression far more careful than contempt. General Collins' fleet has not been destroyed, Vashator continued. I would wager everything I have left that most of his crews are alive, disarmed, and humbled, exactly as the humans intended from the very first hour of contact. This was never a battle for them. It was a demonstration, one they controlled from beginning to end, and one they could have ended far more violently if they had chosen to. They did not choose to. I believe that restraint was the entire point. And if you are wrong? Thessa asked, though her earlier scorn had faded into something more uncertain. Then send your second fleet, Vashator said, and lose it exactly as you lost the first, except this time having been warned, and having chosen to ignore that warning twice. I am not asking the Council to trust me because I am owed anything. I am asking you to consider the cost of testing a species that has already proven it does not need to destroy us to defeat us. Before the Council could respond, an aide rushed into the chamber, breathless, carrying an emergency transmission that had just arrived from the remnants of Threx's fleet. The chamber fell silent as the message played, Threx Collins' own voice exhausted and stripped of its earlier arrogance, confirming everything Vashator had just claimed. His surviving crew were alive, his captured ground troops were unharmed, and Earth, through Threx's own shaken testimony, was requesting formal terms of permanent non-aggression, offered not as a defeated power begging for mercy, but as a civilization stating, calmly and without threat, exactly where its boundaries lay. 2 weeks later, aboard a heavily escorted diplomatic shuttle allowed limited passage into Earth's orbit under carefully negotiated terms, Vashator Kren finally stood face to face with the species he had spent decades trying to understand from a distance. Colonel Ava Reyes met him personally, along with Dr. Malik Osei, in the same unremarkable room where she had once met with Threx Collin under far more hostile circumstances. Threx himself stood beside Vashator now, quieter than the ambitious general who had once mocked an old man's caution, forever changed by what he had witnessed. You were right, Threx said quietly, the first words he had spoken to Vashator since their return. I owe you an apology I do not know how to give properly. You owe the Council a full account of what you witnessed, Vashator replied, though his tone held no bitterness. That will be apology enough, General. It was Ava who finally addressed the question that had haunted Vashator since the beginning, the one he had never dared ask aloud to his own council. You want to know why? She said. Why we built what we built, why we responded the way we did. Vashator nodded, unable to find the words himself. Ava exchanged a glance with Malik before continuing. 40 years ago, a survey vessel entered our system. We did not know at the time whether it came in peace or preparation for conquest. We had just barely survived our own near extinction, a catastrophe of our own making, and we could not risk finding out the hard way which one it was. We disabled it, studied everything it carried, and made a decision that has shaped every choice we've made since. We would prepare for the worst, quietly and completely, and hope we never needed to use what we built. There is something else, Malik added, his voice quieter now, carrying a weight that made Vashator's chest tighten with an instinct he could not name. Something that happened before that probe. Something that shaped who we became long before the Concordance ever knew we existed. He brought up a series of records on the room's display, old fragmented data recovered from deep archaeological sites and half-decayed digital archives that predated even the collapse. Evidence, carefully pieced together over decades of an earlier visitation, centuries before humanity had developed even primitive spaceflight. A species, not of the Concordance, not of any power currently active in known space, that had come to Earth with intentions far more hostile than curiosity, and had very nearly succeeded in wiping humanity out entirely. We do not know who they were, Ava said. We do not know if they still exist or if they will ever return. What we know is that humanity survived them, barely, at a cost that shaped everything about who we became afterward. The unity we built after the collapse, the caution, the refusal to ever again be caught unprepared, all of it traces back to a lesson we learned the hardest way possible, long before any of your people ever looked toward our star. Vashtor stood in silence, the full weight of the truth settling over him. Humanity had not built its quiet, terrifying strength out of ambition or hunger for conquest. They had built it out of survival, out of the memory of nearly disappearing entirely, not once but twice, and the fierce determination that a third time would never come, not while they had breath left to prevent it. Then what happens now? He finally asked. Ava's expression softened just slightly, the closest thing to warmth Vashator had seen from her since their meeting began. Now, General Kren, we go back to being quiet. We are not interested in an empire. We are not interested in the Concordance's politics or its wars, or its endless hunger for expansion. We simply want to be left to grow in peace, the way every species deserves the chance to grow. If your council can accept that, there is no reason we cannot exist alongside each other without conflict. The formal treaty was signed 3 months later, a document remarkable mostly for its brevity. Humanity's sovereignty over its own system would be recognized permanently, and in exchange, Earth agreed only to non-interference in Concordance affairs, an easy promise for a civilization that had never wanted to interfere in the first place. Vashator Kren was reinstated to his former rank, not out of forgiveness, but because the council finally understood the value of a man who had been right when everyone else was wrong. He never returned to Earth again, though he thought of it often, standing beneath the alien sky of his homeworld, remembering the calm, tired voice of a woman who had built something extraordinary out of the ashes of near-total loss, on Earth in the quiet command bunker that had orchestrated humanity's first true test before the wider galaxy. Ava Reyes watched the last Concordance transport depart from orbit, carrying General Cullen and the remnants of his humbled fleet back toward home. Do you think they'll leave us alone now? Malik asked, standing beside her as he so often did. For a while, Ava said. Long enough, maybe, for the next generation to build on what we started. That's all any of us can really hope for, Malik. Not a permanent peace. Just enough time to keep growing stronger, quietly, the way we always have. And if they come back? If someone else decides to test us again? Ava was quiet for a long moment, watching the stars begin to appear as the sun set over the ruins of the city where she had lost her father, the city that had been rebuilt into something stronger than it had ever been before. Then we'll be ready, she said simply. The way we've always been ready. Not because we want to fight, because we remember what it costs when you're not. She turned away from the window, back toward the quiet work of a civilization that had once again chosen patience over pride and mercy over vengeance, exactly as it had chosen every single time the galaxy had underestimated it. Somewhere far above, the last invaders shrank into the darkness and did not return.